The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who couldn't meet my eyes. I signed them in the small kitchen of my modest apartment, the pen trembling slightly in my hand as I watched 7 years of marriage dissolve into legal terminology and notarized signatures. Outside, rain hammered against the window, creating rivers down the glass that mirrored the path I felt forming in my chest. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Sarah had left 3 months ago. 3 months of silence, of unanswered calls, of messages that turned from desperate to resigned. And now this, the final paperwork, clinical and cold, reducing everything we'd built to asset divisions and custody arrangements. Except we had no children. We had no house. We had, according to these documents, almost nothing to divide. I set the pen down and looked around the apartment. 1 bedroom, barely 900 square feet, in a building that smelled perpetually of cooking oil and old carpet. This had been our home for 5 years. Before that, an even smaller place in Queens. Sarah had always said she didn't mind, that we were building something together, that money wasn't everything. I'd believed her because I wanted to, because her words felt like absolution for the secret I'd been keeping since the day we met. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, my best friend since college. Saw the Instagram post. "I'm sorry, man. You doing okay?" Instagram post. My hands moved automatically, opening the app one rarely used, navigating to Sarah's profile. And there it was, the announcement I'd been dreading and expecting in equal measure. Sarah, radiant in a designer dress I'd never seen, standing on what looked like the deck of a yacht, wrapped in the arms of Devon Castellano, tech billionaire, 42 years old, Forbes list regular. In the caption, "Sometimes life surprises you with exactly what you needed. Grateful for new beginnings. #blessed, #new chapter." The comments were already flooding in. Thousands of them. "Congratulations. You deserve happiness. Power couple alert." A few asked about me, about our marriage, but those were buried under the avalanche of celebration and envy. I closed the app and sat in the silence of my apartment. The refrigerator hummed. A siren wailed somewhere in the distance. And I thought about the irony, the cosmic joke that had become my life. My name is James Morrison, and I've been worth $240 million since I turned 21 years old. The money came from my grandfather, Theodore Morrison, a man I barely knew but whose shadow had shaped every decision I'd made for the past decade. He'd built his fortune in commercial real estate during the 80s and 90s, assembling a portfolio of properties across the eastern seaboard that generated passive income like a printing press. When he died, I was 19, midway through my sophomore year at Columbia, studying economics and trying to figure out who I was supposed to become. The lawyers found me in my dorm room, 2 men in expensive suits who looked uncomfortable in the narrow hallway, surrounded by posters and the smell of instant ramen. They explained that my grandfather had structured a trust fund in my name, one that I couldn't access until I turned 21, and that came with very specific conditions. "Mr. Morrison believed that wealth could corrupt," the older lawyer had said, adjusting his glasses. "He wanted you to understand the value of work, of building something with your own hands. The trust stipulates that you cannot reveal the existence of these funds to anyone for a period of 10 years after access is granted. If you do, the entirety of the estate gets donated to charity." I'd laughed. Actually laughed. "That's insane. Why would he do that?" "He felt it would protect you," the younger lawyer interjected, "from people who might want to take advantage, from never knowing if relationships were genuine. He called it the test of character, both yours and those around you. And if I don't agree to these terms, then the money goes to charity immediately. You have until your 21st birthday to decide." I'd spent the next year and a half wrestling with that decision. Part of me wanted to reject it outright, to tell my grandfather's ghost that I didn't need his money or his manipulative conditions. But another part, the practical part that had watched my mother work 2 jobs to put me through high school, that understood what financial security actually meant, knew I couldn't turn it down. On my 21st birthday, I signed the papers, and I made a promise to myself. I would live as if the money didn't exist. I would work, build a career, form relationships based on who I was, not what I had. The trust fund became a secret I carried alone, a weight that grew heavier with every passing year. I met Sarah 6 months later at a mutual friend's barbecue in Brooklyn. She was a middle school teacher, passionate about her students, with a laugh that seemed to light up whatever room she occupied. We talked for 3 hours that first day, about everything and nothing, her frustrations with the education system, my job as a financial analyst at a mid-tier investment firm, our shared love of old science fiction novels and terrible horror movies. She never asked about my finances, never seemed to care that I drove a beat-up Honda or that my apartment had furniture from IKEA and thrift stores. When I told her I couldn't afford expensive dates, she suggested picnics in Prospect Park and dollar-slice pizza crawls. When her friends dated men who flashed their wealth like peacock feathers, she told me she was grateful to be with someone real. I fell in love with her authenticity, with the way she saw the world. Earnest, hopeful, believing that good things came to people who worked hard and treated others with kindness. And I let myself believe that my grandfather had been wrong, that I could have a genuine relationship despite the secret I was keeping, because Sarah would never care about money anyway. We got married 3 years later, in a small ceremony in Central Park with 40 guests and a reception at a neighborhood Italian restaurant. My mother cried. Sarah's parents, salt-of-the-earth people from Ohio, told me they were glad their daughter had found someone with good values. And I signed the marriage certificate knowing that I was committing to this life, to this beautiful lie of simplicity, for at least 7 more years. The first crack appeared 4 years into our marriage. Sarah came home from school one day, exhausted and frustrated, dropping her bag by the door with more force than usual. I was at the kitchen table, reviewing some reports for work, when she announced, "I think I want to quit teaching." I looked up, surprised. Teaching wasn't just her job. It was her identity, her purpose. What happened? Nothing happened. Everything happened. She moved to the window, staring out at the building across the street. "I love the kids, you know I do. But I'm 32 years old, James. I make $48,000 a year. We're living in a rental apartment that's falling apart, and we can't even talk about having children because we can't afford childcare." I look at my friends. Claire just bought a condo in Park Slope. Michelle and Tom are planning a trip to Italy. And I wonder when our life is going to actually start. The words hit me like physical blows. "I thought you didn't care about that stuff. You always said." "I know what I said." Her voice was sharp, then softened. "And I meant it at the time. But I'm tired, James. I'm tired of watching every penny, of buying generic everything, of not being able to help when my mom needs a new roof on her house. You work in finance. Don't you want more?" I did want more. I wanted to tell her that we could have everything she just described and more, that money had never been the obstacle she thought it was. But I was only 5 years into the 10-year requirement, and the words stuck in my throat, trapped behind my grandfather's conditions and my own cowardice. "I'll ask about a raise," I said instead. "And maybe you could tutor on the side? We'll figure it out." She'd nodded, but something in her eyes had changed. A distance had opened between us, small at first, just a hairline fracture in the foundation we'd built. But fractures spread. Over the next 2 years, I watched Sarah transform. She started following lifestyle influencers on Instagram, women who posed in designer clothes and documented luxury vacations. She began staying late at school, then going out afterward with colleagues I never met. The conversations we used to have, deep, meandering talks about books and ideas, became logistics and silence. I tried to bridge the gap. I suggested couples counseling. I planned weekend getaways to small bed and breakfasts we could afford. I told her I loved her every single day, but I could feel her slipping away, drawn toward something I couldn't name because I refused to acknowledge what it was. Then came the night she told me about Devon. It was a Saturday evening, unseasonably warm for March. I'd made dinner, pasta with marinara, nothing fancy, and we were sitting at our small table when Sarah set down her fork with a deliberateness that made me look up. "I need to tell you something," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "I've been offered an opportunity." "What kind of opportunity?" "Devon Castellano came to our school last month. His foundation is funding an education initiative, and they needed teachers to help develop the curriculum. I was selected to be part of the team. She met my eyes. It's an incredible opportunity, James. We're talking about transforming education for underprivileged kids across the country. The kind of impact I've always wanted to make. I should have been happy for her. Should have celebrated this validation of her skills and passion. But something in the way she said his name, Devon, with a familiarity that suggested it wasn't the first time she'd spoken it, made my stomach tighten. That's amazing, I said, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. When does it start? That's the thing. She looked away. It's full-time and it requires a lot of travel. Meetings, conferences, site visits to pilot schools. I'd be working directly with Devon and his executive team. Directly with him? He's very hands-on with his philanthropic work. A defensive edge crept into her tone. This isn't just some vanity project. He genuinely cares about making a difference. Over the following weeks, Sarah's life became consumed by the initiative. She left early, came home late, often smelling of expensive restaurants I knew she couldn't afford on her teacher's salary. She talked about Devon constantly, his vision, his brilliance, his commitment to change, and I watched, paralyzed by my secret, as my wife fell in love with another man's world. The final conversation happened on a Sunday morning in June. I woke to find Sarah already dressed, her suitcase by the door. The sight of it made my heart stop. "I'm leaving," she said before I could speak. "I've been thinking about this for months, and I can't do this anymore." "Can't do what?" "Sarah, talk to me. This." She gestured around the apartment. "This life we're living that isn't going anywhere. You're a good man, James. You're kind and decent, and you've never treated me badly. But I can't spend the rest of my life treading water, pretending that love is enough when we can barely make rent. We can make changes," I said desperately. "I can look for a better job. We can move somewhere cheaper." "I don't want cheaper." The words exploded out of her. "I don't want to pinch pennies for the rest of my life. I don't want to feel guilty every time I buy a nice dress or take a taxi instead of the subway. Devon showed me what life could be like, and I can't unsee it." There it was, the truth laid bare. So this is about him, about his money. It's about having options, about not feeling trapped. Tears streamed down her face. "You don't understand what it's like, James. You've never had to struggle the way I have. Your job at least pays decently. I'm a teacher. I've dedicated my life to helping kids, and society treats me like I'm disposable. Devon sees my value. He wants to build something with me, something that matters." I could have told her then, could have revealed that we'd never actually been struggling, that I'd been choosing this life while she suffered through it. But the words wouldn't come, because telling her would mean admitting that I'd been lying to her for 7 years, that every sacrifice she'd made had been unnecessary, that I'd watched her transform and drift away when I could have stopped it at any moment. "I love you," I said instead. "I know." She picked up her suitcase. "I loved you too. But love isn't enough, and I'm tired of pretending it is." She walked out, and I let her go. The weeks after Sarah left blurred together into a fog of routine and numbness. I went to work, came home, ordered takeout, and sat in the apartment that felt too large and too small at the same time. My coworkers noticed the change. I'd always been quiet, but now I was practically invisible, drifting through meetings and deadlines like a ghost. Marcus called every few days, insisting on meeting for drinks or dinner, but I made excuses. I wasn't ready to explain what had happened, wasn't ready to hear the questions I knew he'd ask. Marcus was one of the few people who knew about my trust fund. We'd been roommates when the lawyers first contacted me, and he'd been there the night I turned 21, watching me sign the papers with a mixture of concern and disbelief. "This is going to screw you up," he'd said that night. "Keeping a secret like this, it's not natural. It's not healthy. It's just money," I'd replied. "No, man. It's not just money. It's your whole reality being different from what you let people see. That kind of disconnect. It changes you." He'd been right, of course. The secret had changed me, hollowed me out in ways I hadn't fully recognized until Sarah was gone. I'd spent so many years performing the role of struggling but hopeful young professional that I'd lost track of who I actually was underneath it all. The Instagram posts continued. Sarah at charity galas in glittering gowns. Sarah touring Devon's properties, a penthouse in Manhattan, a beach house in the Hamptons, a villa in Tuscany. Sarah smiling with a radiance I hadn't seen in years, the worry lines around her eyes smoothed away by newfound security and endless possibilities. The comments multiplied. People I'd never heard of weighing in on her relationship, her transformation, her glow-up. Some criticized her for leaving her husband so publicly, but they were drowned out by supporters who praised her for choosing herself and not settling. I read every comment, torturing myself with the narrative being constructed. In this story, I was the anchor that had held her back, the small-minded partner who couldn't match her ambitions. And maybe they were right. Maybe keeping my secret made me exactly that. My 21st birthday, the day I'd gained access to the trust fund, had been June 15th. Sarah left me on June 8th, just 1 week before the 10-year mark would have ended, before I could have finally told her the truth without losing everything. The irony was so perfect it felt designed by a malicious god. 3 days after signing the divorce papers, I received a call from Richard Chen, the lawyer who managed my trust fund. We spoke once a year, usually just to review performance and distributions, but this call was different. James, I need to discuss something with you. Given your recent divorce, there are some legal matters we should address. The trust fund, specifically, now that you're no longer married, we need to update the beneficiary designations and review the asset protection structures we put in place. Asset protection? Yes. When you married, we established certain trusts and LLCs to shield your assets from any potential claims. Standard procedure for high net worth individuals. Your ex-wife has no legal claim to the trust fund. It was established before the marriage and kept completely separate, but we should still review everything to ensure there are no vulnerabilities. The words felt surreal. Asset protection. High net worth individual. These terms belong to a different person, someone who existed only in lawyers' offices and financial statements. Richard, I need to ask you something. If I told Sarah about the money, would she have been entitled to any of it in the divorce? A pause. No, not directly. The trust structure specifically protects inherited wealth. However, she could have argued for lifestyle maintenance, claiming she'd become accustomed to a certain standard of living. But given that you never accessed significant amounts during the marriage, that argument would have been weak. Why do you ask? Just curious. But I wasn't just curious. I was starting to understand the full scope of what I'd done, not just to Sarah, but to myself. I'd lived like a pauper while sitting on a fortune, and I'd convinced myself it was noble, that I was preserving something authentic. But all I'd preserved was isolation and pain. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I logged into the account that held my trust fund and actually looked at the numbers. $243.7 million. The properties my grandfather had acquired continued to appreciate, the investments continued to compound, and I'd barely touched any of it beyond the modest salary I paid myself through a consulting LLC Richard had established. I could buy a dozen apartments like the one I was living in, could travel anywhere in the world, could start a foundation, fund scholarships, change lives the way Devon was changing lives with Sarah by his side. Instead, I'd done nothing, preserved nothing, protected nothing. My phone rang. Marcus again. This time I answered. Finally, he said. I was about to show up at your apartment with a crowbar. How are you holding up? I don't know. Numb, mostly. Listen, I know you're probably not up for this, but there's something you should know. I've been doing some digging into Devon Castellano. Don't ask me why. Maybe just morbid curiosity. And some things aren't adding up. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. I sat up straighter. What do you mean? His company, the tech startup that made him billions. There are questions about how the books were managed during the IPO. Nothing concrete, just rumors and sealed settlements, but enough that some journalists have been sniffing around. And his foundation, the one Sarah's working for? It's real, but it's also a tax shelter. Most of the money gets recycled back into his other businesses. The actual impact is minimal. You're saying he's a fraud? I'm saying he's not the saint Sarah thinks he is. And I'm saying that maybe, just maybe, this situation isn't as straightforward as her Instagram feed makes it look. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my apartment and thought about Devon Castellano, about the image he projected versus the reality Marcus was uncovering, about how Sarah had been drawn to the appearance of wealth and purpose, never questioning what lay beneath. And I realized something that made my stomach turn. I'd done the same thing in reverse. I'd created an image of principled simplicity, of being a man unburdened by material concerns, while hiding the truth of my privilege. Sarah had fallen for Devon's performance, and I'd built my entire life around my own. 2 weeks later, my phone buzzed with an unexpected message from Sarah. "Can we meet? Need to talk about something. Not about us, something else." We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in the village, neutral territory far from our old neighborhood. I arrived first, ordering a black coffee and sitting at a corner table where I could watch the door. When Sarah walked in, my breath caught. She looked tired in a way that makeup couldn't hide, the radiance from her photos dimmed by something I couldn't quite identify. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. She didn't order anything. "What's going on?" She looked down at her hands. "I need advice, and you're the only person I trust who understands finance. It's about Devon." "Sarah, please just listen. Something's wrong, and I don't know what to do about it." She took a breath. "The foundation, the education initiative I've been working on, it's not what I thought it was. The money that's supposed to go to schools is being funneled through these complicated structures that I don't understand." When I asked questions, Devon's CFO told me not to worry about it, that it was just tax optimization. "But James, I've been to the schools we're supposedly funding, and they're not getting what was promised." I felt a strange mixture of emotions: vindication, concern, and a deep sadness. "What do you want me to do?" "Look at these documents." She pulled out her phone, scrolling through photos of spreadsheets and legal papers. "Tell me if I'm crazy, or if something illegal is happening." I studied the images, my analyst training kicking in automatically. Marcus had been right. The foundation was essentially a pass-through entity, claiming charitable deductions while routing most of the money back to Devon's for-profit enterprises. Not technically illegal, but ethically bankrupt. "This is a scam," I said finally. "A legal scam, but a scam nonetheless. The foundation exists primarily to enhance Devon's public image and reduce his tax burden. The actual charitable impact is minimal." Sarah's face crumpled. "I've been helping him. I've been part of this. You didn't know. I should have known. I was so blinded by—" She stopped, shaking her head. "God, I'm an idiot." "You're not an idiot. He's good at this. The performance, the image, it's his business model." We sat in silence for a moment. Then Sarah asked, her voice small, "How did you know? How did you always seem so content with so little?" This was my moment. The 10-year restriction had ended 2 weeks ago. I could tell her everything, could reveal the truth that might change how she saw our entire relationship. But looking at her, vulnerable, scared, realizing that she'd traded something real for something hollow, I found I didn't want to. I knew because I understood that the things that matter, genuine connection, purpose, integrity, those can't be bought, I said instead. "I tried to tell you that, but you weren't ready to hear it. And now you've learned it the hard way." Sarah left an hour later, promising to think about what to do with the information I'd confirmed. I watched her go, wondering if she'd stay with Devon, if the comfort and security would outweigh the compromised ethics, or if she'd walk away and start over. I realized I didn't know which outcome I was hoping for. The revelation about Devon's foundation gave me clarity I hadn't expected. I spent the next month meeting with Richard and a team of advisors, finally ready to engage with the wealth I'd been ignoring for a decade. "I want to start a real foundation," I told them. "One that actually does what Devon's pretends to do. Education, but done right. Funding schools, supporting teachers, creating programs that make a genuine difference." Richard smiled. I've been waiting 10 years to hear you say something like that. We established the Morrison Education Initiative, funded with $50 million from my trust fund. I hired experts, former teachers, education policy specialists, community organizers who understood what schools actually needed. And I made a decision. I would work at this full-time, leaving my financial analyst job to dedicate myself to something meaningful. For the first time since I was 21, I felt like I was actually using my resources instead of being paralyzed by them. 3 months later, Marcus called with news. Devon's being investigated. The SEC is looking into his IPO, and journalists are digging into his foundation. It's all coming out. I watched the news coverage with a strange detachment. Devon Castellano, tech billionaire, facing questions about fraud, tax evasion, and false philanthropy. His empire, built on image and leverage debt, beginning to crumble under scrutiny. Sarah called me the day the news broke. I left him, she said without preamble. 2 weeks ago, before this all came out, I couldn't live with what I knew. Are you okay? No, but I will be. A pause. James, I need you to know something. I'm sorry. For all of it, for losing sight of what mattered, for hurting you, for choosing the appearance of success over actual substance. You tried to tell me, and I wouldn't listen. I know. Can I ask you something? How did you stay so grounded? Most people, if they had the opportunities Devon had, they'd become exactly what he became. But you never did. Why? This was it. The moment to tell her the truth. And this time I found I could. Because I've had those opportunities, Sarah. I've had them since I was 21 years old. I told her everything. About my grandfather, the trust fund, the 10-year restriction, the decision to live simply and keep it secret. I told her about watching her struggle while I had the means to end it, about the weight of that secret destroying us more surely than poverty ever could have. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. You're saying you were rich this whole time? The entire marriage? Yes. And you let me. You watched me leave you because of money, when you had. Her voice broke off, somewhere between laughter and tears. I don't know whether to be furious or amazed. You can be both. Why didn't you tell me? Before the 10 years were up, why didn't you just tell me? Because I was afraid. Afraid you'd feel betrayed. Afraid it would change everything between us. Afraid that keeping the secret made me exactly the kind of person my grandfather was trying to protect me from becoming. I took a breath. And because by the time I realized I should have told you anyway, you were already gone. What are you going to do now? With all that money? I told her about the foundation, about the work I was doing, about finally engaging with my wealth in a way that felt honest and purposeful. And I told her that I was learning, slowly, that the secret hadn't protected me from anything. It had just isolated me from the people I loved. I'm glad, she said finally. I'm glad you're doing something real, that you're not letting it sit there unused while you pretend to be someone you're not. Are we okay? I asked, not entirely sure what I meant by the question. I don't know, but we're honest now, maybe for the first time. And that's something. The Morrison Education Initiative funded its 100th school last month. I stood in the gymnasium of a middle school in Detroit, watching teachers and students celebrate the new computer lab, the renovated science classrooms, the arts program that was finally fully staffed. A woman approached me, Ms. Rodriguez, one of the teachers who'd helped design our curriculum programs. Mr. Morrison, there's someone who wants to thank you personally. She led me to a quiet hallway where Sarah stood, holding the hand of a young girl I didn't recognize. James, this is Maya, Sarah said. She's one of the students in our mentorship program. Maya, this is Mr. Morrison. He's the one who makes all of this possible. The girl looked up at me with serious eyes. My teacher says you used to be a regular person, that you didn't have to do this, but you chose to. I knelt down to her level. Your teacher's right. And you know what I learned? Having resources doesn't make you special. What you choose to do with them, that's what matters. After Maya left, Sarah and I stood in the hallway, the sounds of celebration echoing around us. I'm teaching again, she said. Here, actually. I'm running the education equity program we developed last year. I heard. Marcus told me you joined the team. I needed to do something real. After everything with Devon, I needed to remember why I became a teacher in the first place. She looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes that reminded me of the woman I'd met at that Brooklyn barbecue. You were right, about what matters. I just had to lose everything to figure it out. We both lost things. We both learned. Can I buy you coffee sometime? Just coffee, nothing more. I'd like to hear about the work you're doing. And maybe we could figure out how to be friends. I smiled. I'd like that. We weren't who we used to be. The marriage was over. The wounds too deep to simply heal with revelation and reconciliation. But standing there in that school hallway, surrounded by the evidence of what we'd both learned about value and purpose, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. My grandfather had thought his test would teach me to value genuine relationships. What it actually taught me was that secrets, even ones kept for noble reasons, poison everything they touch. The money was never the problem. The hiding was. I walked out of the school into the late afternoon sun, my phone buzzing with messages from the foundation team, from educators, from people whose lives were being changed by resources deployed with intention and care. The trust fund still had nearly $200 million. Enough to do this work for the rest of my life, to build something that actually mattered, to prove that wealth could be a tool for change instead of just another barrier between people. Sarah was right. I had been a regular person. And in the ways that mattered, I still was. The difference now was that I'd stopped pretending otherwise. I'd stopped hiding behind my grandfather's test and started building something real. My wife had left me for a billionaire who turned out to be a fraud. And in losing her, I'd found the courage to finally be myself. All of myself, including the parts I'd been too afraid to show. It wasn't the ending I'd planned, but it was honest. And for the first time in 10 years, that was enough.